I had not stepped foot into that house in more than 2 years. Not since the divorce. Not since the looks that told me I had let them down. But this Christmas I said yes. Not because I believed anything had changed, but because of one question from my daughter Lena. She had looked up at me with those wide brown eyes asking, "Mom, do I have a grandpa?" And just like that, all my reasons for staying away crumbled under the weight of her hope. She wasn't just asking about a man. She was asking about belonging. About why we spent holidays just the two of us. About what it meant to be a family. So I packed a small suitcase, tied her scarf extra tight, and drove through the frostbitten countryside to a house that had never felt like home. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I felt it. That pressure in my chest. The kind that tightens with every step toward a place you once called home, only to remember it was never really yours. The house was immaculate, of course. It always was. The lawn trimmed like a showroom. The windows sparkling like no one actually lived inside. I reached over and squeezed Lena's hand. She smiled, clutching a folder filled with carefully colored drawings she had made over the past week. One for each family member. She had asked me how to spell Aunt Chloe, Uncle Greg, Grandma Diane. She even made one for Walter, her grandfather, a man she'd never met. We knocked. Diane opened the door with a fixed smile, her eyes darting to Lena's scuffed boots before forcing out a tight, "Merry Christmas." She offered a quick pat to Lena's head and ushered us inside. The warmth of the heater hit us instantly, but it didn't chase away the chill in the air. Chloe was on the couch, eyes glued to her phone. "Hey," she muttered without looking up. Greg gave a nod from the kitchen doorway, then disappeared. And Walter. He didn't even rise from his leather armchair. Just lifted his chin and muttered, "Didn't expect to see you here." That was all. That was the grand welcome. Lena, ever the optimist, tugged off her mittens and whispered, "Hi, Grandpa." He grunted. My heart sank. I had been foolish. I thought maybe they'd see her and something would soften. Maybe the past could be forgiven in the face of her innocence. But I had forgotten what this house did to people. It polished surfaces and hardened hearts. Still, Lena didn't flinch. She reached into her folder and began handing out her drawings, one by one. Each carefully folded, labeled with blocky handwriting. Chloe didn't even look up as she took hers. Diane gave a clipped, "How sweet," before setting it aside like junk mail. Lena saved Walter's for last. She approached him cautiously, held it out with both hands and said, "Merry Christmas, Grandpa." He didn't even look at it. Just extended a hand without peeling his eyes from the muted television screen. I watched Lena return to the couch and sit beside me. Her face still hopeful, still glowing with effort. I hated that I had brought her here. I hated that I had opened the door to this rejection. And then Walter reached under the tree. He picked up a box, silver paper, red bow, perfectly wrapped. He grunted and held it toward Lena. "Says your name on it, doesn't it?" She looked at me first. I nodded, even though everything inside me screamed to stop her. She took it gently, placed it on her lap, and began to unwrap it slowly. Her fingers slid over the edges like it was made of glass. She opened the lid. Her face froze. Inside there was nothing. No toy, no note, no paper. Just a hollow cardboard bottom. Me. I saw the confusion cross her face like a cloud moving across the sun. Then the pain. But she said nothing. She just looked at me. Her lips trembling, eyes glossy but unspilled. Then came the sound I will never forget. Walter laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from joy. It was sharp, cold, dismissive. "Kids like her shouldn't expect anything," he said, sipping his whiskey. "World's got enough leeches already." The silence in the room deepened like a well. Chloe muttered something about apples not falling far from trees. My hands clenched in my lap. My jaw tightened. My vision blurred at the edges. Lena didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She just stared into that empty box like maybe the gift was hiding beneath the flaps. It wasn't. And still she stayed silent. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag her out of that house, to shield her from their cruelty, to burn every memory of this place from her mind. But I couldn't move. I had frozen. Just like I had all those years ago, sitting at that same table, hearing those same tones, letting the shame seep in. But this time something was different. Lena looked up. Her small voice broke through the stillness. "It's okay," she whispered. "I got you a gift too, Grandpa." And for the first time that day, the entire room stopped breathing. Lena stood from the couch with that quiet bravery only children seem to carry. She clutched the drawing meant for Walter, still perfectly folded, the crayon lines visible even through the paper. Her boots were still by the front door, soaked and muddy from the walk-in, but she didn't notice the mess. She walked across the polished hardwood floor with steady steps, one small hand outstretched, holding something that no longer felt like a simple drawing. Walter, still lounging in his armchair, glanced at her with mild irritation, the kind reserved for telemarketers and dogs that bark too loud. His glass clinked against the coaster as he set it down, more curious now than kind. Lena stopped just in front of him, lifting her hand. "I made this for you," she said, voice soft but clear. "Even though we've never met." Walter didn't take it. So she placed it gently on his knee. Then she turned, walked back to me, and sat down again without saying another word. The entire room held its breath. Walter looked down at the folded paper like it was a trap. Slowly he opened it. A childish drawing revealed itself, filled with color and care. There were 3 stick figures, one tall man with gray hair, a woman with long black curls, and a little girl holding both their hands. Above them in block letters she had written, "Grandpa and me." The man in the drawing had a big smile, bigger than Walter had worn in years. The room shifted. Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Greg, who had returned silently from the kitchen, now leaned against the wall watching. Even Diane tilted her head, her eyes flicking between the drawing and the granddaughter she barely acknowledged. Walter didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the image. Maybe it was the innocence. Maybe it was the quiet act of forgiveness nestled in those crayon lines. Or maybe it was the fact that no one had ever drawn him happy before. I waited for him to laugh again, to toss it aside with some biting remark. But he didn't. Instead he blinked, once, then again. I saw something shift behind his weathered face. Something human. Something I hadn't seen in years. Not since before the money, before the control, before he became the cold man who measured love in obligation and discipline. "You drew this?" he asked, voice hoarse, eyes still on the paper. Lena nodded. There was a long pause. Walter didn't look up. He just stared at the simple artwork, tracing its lines with tired eyes. Finally he reached for his glass again, but not to drink. He moved it aside, cleared the table. Then, with trembling fingers, he set the drawing down in the center of the wood as though it were something sacred. Nobody spoke. The television continued its low murmur in the background, but even its sound felt distant now. Diane stood first. She walked toward the kitchen, murmuring something about needing to check the roast. Chloe slipped her phone into her pocket and vanished upstairs without a word. Only Greg remained, arms crossed, watching his father with a face caught between disbelief and curiosity. Walter leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the drawing like it might disappear if he blinked too long. "Your mother," he said slowly, "used to draw like this when she was your age. I found one in the attic a while ago." His voice cracked at the end. Not from sadness, but from memory. I felt something twist in my chest. A memory of my own. Of sitting at this same table years ago, holding up a picture of a sunset I'd drawn, and hearing him mutter, "Waste of time." Of how I had thrown that paper away and stopped drawing for good. Lena, sitting beside me, just smiled. "Maybe you still have it," she said. Walter didn't answer. But he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small and folded. Piece of paper. Yellowed with age, creased at the corners. He opened it slowly. It was my drawing. Faded, yes, but mine. A crude orange sun over a crooked hill. I must have been 7. And he had kept it. All this time, the air felt warmer suddenly. Lena leaned against my side and whispered, "See? He remembered." I didn't know what to say. Greg cleared his throat. "Dad, the fire's dying," he said gently. Walter stood up without a word, walked to the fireplace, and threw on another log. Sparks danced upward, casting flickers of gold across the walls. He returned to his chair, but this time he didn't sink into it like a king on a throne. He sat like a man unsure of his footing, a man trying to recall what it felt like to be kind. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" he asked almost awkwardly, his voice directed at Lena. She lit up. "Yes, please." He gave a small nod and walked to the kitchen. Greg turned to me, eyebrows raised. "I don't think I've ever heard him ask anyone that," he said. Neither had I. And yet, in the kitchen, I could hear the clatter of mugs, the rustle of a packet being opened, the hum of a kettle, then Walter's voice quietly calling, "2 sugars or 3? Lena grinned. "3, she called back. And just like that, the chill in the house began to thaw. Not completely, not permanently, but for the first time in years, it felt like something real could grow again. The next morning brought a softness to the air that hadn't lived in that house for years. Sunlight filtered through the curtains like it was hesitant to touch anything too cold. Lena had fallen asleep curled up on the couch, a book still clutched in her arms, and for once, I had slept without waking up in the middle of the night with that familiar tightness in my chest. Something had shifted. I could feel it. But old wounds are tricky. They don't always bleed in public. Walter was already up. I heard him moving around above us, heavy footsteps pacing the attic floor. Greg was in the kitchen making coffee. Real coffee this time, not whatever bitter sludge Walter used to drink. The scent filled the house. And for the first time it didn't make me feel sick. "Your father's in the attic?" asked as I walked in. Greg nodded, pouring 2 cups. "Said he was looking for something." "What?" I shrugged. "Didn't say. But he's been up there nearly an hour." That was enough to make me uneasy. Walter didn't just wander. He controlled. Every step had purpose. Every gesture had calculation. The man didn't look for things. He summoned them. I climbed the stairs quietly. The attic door creaked when I opened it, revealing a space thick with dust and time. Old trunks, forgotten lamps, photo albums stacked in corners. And there, near the back, hunched over a pile of boxes, was Walter. He didn't hear me come in. "Dad!" He turned, startled. In his hands was a photograph. A small, square Polaroid, the edges worn, the color faded. "I thought I lost this," he said. I walked closer. The picture was of my mother. Young, beautiful, with her hair tied up in that way she used to when baking. I hadn't seen that face in so long. She was standing beside a painting. A child's painting of a house and tree and sun, the same crude shapes I'd seen in my own drawings. She was smiling. "She kept everything you made," he said quietly. "Even the bad ones." I smiled sadly. She was always the keeper of things. Walter sat down on an old chair by the attic window. For a moment, he didn't look like a man who'd built empires or crushed negotiations. He just looked like someone who'd lost more than he ever admitted. "She wanted to name you Claire," he said suddenly. That froze me. "What?" "She said Sophie was too stiff. Said Claire would be a name that could bend with the wind." I didn't know that. "She lost that fight. Like she lost most of them." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Walter held out another paper. This one had jagged crayon strokes, mine again unmistakably, and written at the top in block letters, barely readable. "For Dad." I blinked hard. "You kept all of them." "I threw them away once," he said, voice cracking. "Then pulled them out of the trash when no one was looking." He set the drawing on the windowsill where the sun hit it just right. "It's not that I didn't care," he said. "I just didn't know how to show it. My father used to say showing love was like handing someone your only weapon and hoping they didn't stab you." I looked at him, this man I had feared, resented, and slowly started to understand. You stabbed us anyway, I said gently. He nodded. I did. Outside, I could hear Lena laughing with Greg in the yard. Their joy floated up through the window, a sound so pure it cut through the dust in the room like sunlight. I don't want to leave this house to dust, Walter said after a pause. I want it to mean something again. I want her to have memories here. Real ones. Not just stories of a man who glared from the shadows. I sat down across from him. Then start making them, I said. And for once he didn't argue. He just nodded. Together we opened another box. And then another. And somewhere between the broken lamp and the photo albums, we found something we hadn't seen in years. Ourselves. The following evening came with a kind of stillness that usually lives between storms. Not a threatening quiet, but a cautious one, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Dinner was set in the dining room, the big one, the one we hadn't used in years. Walter sat at the head of the table again, but not in his old way, not as a throne to command from. This time it felt more like he was holding the place in memory of someone. Greg and Lena had picked flowers from the backyard. They were wild and unevenly trimmed, but Lena had arranged them in an old jam jar with such careful intention that they outshone any bouquet from a florist. She placed them in the center of the table proudly. I'm calling it a centerpiece, she declared. Walter gave a short nod. Looks better than the ones your grandmother used to force on us. That earned a smirk from Greg and a chuckle from me. But then there was the empty chair, my mother's. No one said it aloud, but we all saw it. The space felt like a shadow. Lena noticed. Who's sitting there? She asked. Walter didn't answer right away. He looked at the chair for a long moment, then said, It's hers. Lena blinked. Grandma's. Yes. Was. Can I draw her? She asked. He looked up surprised. What? I never got to meet her. But I can draw her if you tell me what she looked like. Walter looked at me, then back to Lena. She had your eyes, he said softly. And she made the best cornbread, I added. Better than Dad's. Lena teased. Much better, I whispered. Walter chuckled. It was short, but it was real. She wore blue a lot. Navy mostly. Said it made her feel tall. She always had paint under her nails, I added. Even when she wore gloves. And she used to hum when she cooked, Walter continued. Never a full song, just the same 4 or 5 notes over and over. Lena was already pulling her sketchbook out from under the table. She flipped to a clean page and began sketching softly, her pencil moving in rhythm with our memories. The dinner itself was simple. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, but it tasted like something more. Tasted like effort. Like someone had thought about what would make everyone feel warm. Like someone had tried. Midway through the meal, Walter reached into his coat and slid an envelope across the table. It was old, yellowed slightly at the corners, and sealed with a bit of wax. For you, he said, eyes on me. Picked it up carefully. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting. My breath hitched. She wrote it the day Lena was born, Walter said. She told me not to give it to you until I was ready. Took me a little longer than expected. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Short. Simple. Just like her. Dear Sophie. Asterisk if you're reading this. Then you've become a mother. And I want you to know that I see you. I always saw you. Even when we argued. Even when we didn't understand each other. You were always stronger than you believed. Asterisk. Asterisk love her fully. Fiercely. Gently. You don't have to be perfect. Just present. Asterisk. Asterisk and tell your father. To put down the armor once in a while. The war is over. Asterisk. Asterisk love. Mum. Asterisk. I folded it slowly, holding back the tears that burned behind my eyes. When I looked up, Walter was already looking away, pretending to focus on the food in front of him. But I saw it. The shimmer in his eyes. The way his fork stayed frozen midair. Lena kept sketching. Quiet. Observant. Steady. At the end of the meal, she slid her paper across the table to Walter. It was a drawing of the dining table, just as we were now. Walter at the head, me to his right, Greg next to me, Lena across. And in the empty chair, she had drawn a woman in soft navy blue. Her hair tied back, a smudge of paint on one hand, her face gentle and smiling. "She looks like someone I'd like to meet," Lena said. Walter nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "She would have liked you very much." And then, without warning, he stood up, walked over to Lena's side, and placed a kiss on top of her head. Not a performance. Not a gesture. A memory made real. And for the first time in years, we finished dinner at that table without leaving behind any silence. Winter thickened its grip outside as the days folded into the new year. Snow stacked quietly along the window ledges, untouched and perfect, while inside our home, the air felt different, not fixed but softer. Lena had placed her drawing of the Christmas table in a frame, setting it on the mantel without saying a word. She didn't need to. The image spoke for itself. One morning, a small parcel arrived on our doorstep. Brown paper, tied with twine, no return address. Just Lena's name written in blocky, deliberate letters across the top. I stared at it for a long second before calling her over. "It's for you," I said. She blinked, wide-eyed, then took it gently into her hands. She untied the string with care, slowly unwrapping the paper as though it might vanish if she moved too fast. Inside was a music box. Wooden, old-fashioned, polished by time. Tiny painted roses curled around the lid like a forgotten garden. When she turned the little brass crank, a familiar tune floated out, somewhere over the rainbow, soft and warbled like memory. She didn't speak. She just sat cross-legged on the floor listening. And then she noticed it, tucked inside beneath the velvet lining, a small, folded note. She pulled it out carefully, opened it, and read aloud. "To the bravest girl I know. Thank you for remembering her." No signature. No explanation. But she didn't need one. Her fingers brushed the side of the box like it was made of something sacred. She smiled, small and quiet, and said, "He remembered." Later that evening, while she was in bed, I found a second letter tucked in the mailbox. This one was for me. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, aged. Just 3 lines. "I was wrong about you. She's a good kid. I hope you're doing okay." No name. But I knew. I sat down on the front steps, letter in hand, while the cold bit at my fingers. And for the first time in years I let myself cry. Not from pain, not from grief, but from recognition. After years of trying to be seen, of walking into rooms where I vanished behind their disappointment, someone had finally looked again. Greg found me there a while later. He didn't ask what the letter said. He just sat beside me and leaned his head against my arm like he used to when he was little. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I've been in a long time." The next few days passed like snow falling, gentle and quiet. Lena wound the music box every night, not always to listen, but just to feel it in her hands. To know it was there. She called it her memory box, not because it held something but because it gave something back. Sometimes she'd mention my mother in passing like she was someone she knew, not just someone she'd heard stories about. "She would have liked honey in her tea, right?" she asked once. "She did," I answered, startled. "She looks like someone who liked sweet things." And just like that, the dead weren't gone. They were folded into our days, stitched into our routines, lingering in the warmth of cocoa mugs and the way Lena lined up her pencils just so. The drawing she'd given Frank, still a mystery, never came up again. She didn't describe it. I never asked. But I found out one afternoon when I was cleaning up her room. Tucked under her mattress was a second version. It showed Frank and my mother, hand in hand, standing in front of the house, with me beside them, holding Lena's hand. All 4 of us connected. Family. Not perfect. Not whole. But trying. At the bottom, in Lena's slanted handwriting, were the words, "I hope you smile again one day." That was the gift. Not just a picture, but a wish. Possibility. And somehow, impossibly, it had found its way through the cracks of an old man's wall. Not to fix everything, but to remind him he'd once been more than bitterness. that he had loved, that he could still choose to care, even if quietly from afar, that maybe he could be remembered for something other than what he failed to be. Weeks later, a package arrived from an unfamiliar address. Inside was a small canvas, painting. It was clumsy and rough, but I knew who painted it. 4 figures, standing in snow, hands linked. A single note was scrawled across the back. Asterisk not perfect, but starting, asterisk. And that's what we became. Not perfect, but starting. Always starting. Together.